it's not up to us to make moral judgments about the people staying in the hotel. Daughters of the traditional South? Those bigots in bonnets aren't staying in this hotel.
Roland, there is nothing wrong with the daughters of the traditional South.
Oh, I see. When they put those sheets on over their heads, it must be some kind of salute to Casper the Friendly Ghost.
Oh, when is that? Roland, this is not that kind of organization.
Are you telling me you really don't see who these women are?
I am telling you that I see 10 rooms in our hotel rented for 3 nights at a time when we desperately need the business. You are overreacting. This is just a bunch of harmless little old ladies who like to get together and put on white gloves and have tea. And as you said, it's not our business to pass judgment on our guests. We're here to make people feel welcome.
Fine.
Where are you going?
Oh, to get my jockey suit and lantern. I'm gonna go stand on the front lawn, make them feel right at home. Someone showing complete disregard for an entire race of people.
Blanche isn't like that. You don't know her. Sure, she may come from the old South, but she's a very modern thinker.
And I wish I was in Dixie, away, away. In Dixieland, I'll take my stand and live and die in Dixie, away, 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 down.
And the sad thing is, she isn't even wearing a hoop.
Wait up, you're not hanging that flag in here.
Well, of course I am.
Blanche, do you know what this flag represents?
This flag belonged to big Granddaddy Hollingsworth. He used to bring it to all our fine old Southern family picnics where all the cousins would gather. Everybody was courteous and mannerly, and gentlemen would ask ladies for the favor of a dance. And Cousin Rex would be home on vacation from Colonel Bob's school for bad boys. He'd ask me for the favor other than the dancing favor. And we'd... It's a grand old flag.
Wait a minute, now I get it. This is just good old-fashioned fun.
Yes!
Okay, well, say, how about on Tuesday nights we hang the Nazi flag, hire an oompa band, and dress you up like Eva Braun?
This is not the same as the Nazi flag.
Yeah, well, it is to me, Blanche. Look, when you look at this flag, you see some Southern fairy tale with the guy who looks like Burl Ives dressed in a white suit tipping his hat to you saying, "Evening, Miss Blanche."
Evening. Oh, I'm sorry, Roland. You were making a point.
That's not funny, Blanche.
Well, that's ancient history, and you know it. Things aren't like that anymore. Uh-oh, here they come. So, are we going to check them in? Can we afford not to?
After they're checked in, Blanche, I want this flag to come down.
Hey, what are you doing?
I don't want this here, Blanche.
Well, I swear, if you're not making such a thing. You know, I remember once when big Granddaddy Hollingsworth took...
Just stop it. This flag, Mrs. Devereaux, is not about college football games or quilting bees or fried chicken on Sunday. It's about colleges that won't let me in. It's about companies that won't hire me. It is about crosses being burnt on people's lawns today. Not in the evil past, Blanche, today. And not just in the South, all over. The North is just as bad.
Damn Yankees.
You honestly don't get this, do you?
I don't see where there's anything to get. This is just a flag. To me, this is just a bunch of wonderful family memories.
Well, I don't think I want to work for anybody who feels that way. I don't think I can.
But Roland...
I'm just gonna look for another job, Blanche. You did the right thing, Rose.
I did? I did the right thing. I did?
Yeah. Sometimes what you believe is more important than business. Although what some people believe is unbelievable.
Now, Roland, I am not some kind of bigot because I love this flag and I resent that implication. You just stop that right now.
Oh, yes, ma'am, Miss Devereaux. Old Roland don't want to cause you no trouble at all.
You hold on to that one. He's a good one.
What did you say?
He's a good one.
Roland, wait. Hey, Roland, I don't feel like that woman in there. I don't feel that way at all.
But can't you see, Blanche, that flag ties what you believe and what she believes together. Look, I'm telling you, the legacy of that flag is alive every time I walk down the street with a group of my friends and I see a white person cross over to the other side because they're afraid. Or look, when I'm in the elevator with somebody like you and you're all huddled over in the corner wondering what I'm gonna do, sometimes I just want to go, oh. Just to break the tension. So please don't tell me about that flag. I've battled that flag all my life.
Look, Roland, I'm sorry. I am sorry for everything you have been through, but what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to think about all my family, all my friends? All right, when I was in school, maybe I was a little less sensitive than I could have been. But, yeah, but I was just doing what all my friends were doing. They were my friends, and we were just acting like everybody we knew acted. Oh. And then when I had my first baby, well, the hospital was packed, and I had to share a room with a young black woman. George made a big stink about the accommodation. She had to have heard him. And I know her baby was every bit as cute as mine. Cuter, in fact. Rebecca was an ugly baby. Turned out fine. Ugly baby. You can get an idea of how she looked if you catch Sophia some morning with her teeth out. The point is, what am I supposed to do and think about my family now? What am I supposed to think about all those people I love? What am I supposed to think about me? Everything I grew up believing in, all my wonderful memories, they're all tarnished now by... God, by the truth.
I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. In Dixieland where I was born early on one.
Well, after the weekend violence in Charlottesville, several cities have decided that they, too, are going to take down their monuments to the Civil War. Baltimore hastily carried away 4 Confederate monuments Wednesday morning. Lexington, Kentucky is hoping to do the same. The Reverend Jacques DeGraff is a Fox News contributor. He's a social justice champion, he says, and he supports removing all Confederate monuments. The Reverend DeGraff joins us now. Jacques, good to see you.
Good to see you, Tucker.
So let me just say at the outset that I'm kind of sympathetic to your point of view. I mean, I wouldn't want to see something that offended me every day. There was an Al Sharpton monument on my street, you know, a Marion Barry monument. I wouldn't like it. So I don't, you know, if you're offended by these monuments, I totally get that. But here's my question.
It's not that I'm offended. It's an offense
okay, but
to the United States of America to honor war criminals, to honor those who were traitors.
So that's...
They're traitors to our country.
So that's the standard. I just want to know what the... Well, they certainly were traitors to our country. They started their own country. I mean, by
they were
definition,
traitors and human rights violators. So the combination is there's no country on the planet, no society that would honor those people with credentials like that.
Except ours, because it was a civil war. And I agree with your definition. I mean, they were traitors to America, but then they came back into America. They reintegrated into America. That was the point. The country broke. And then it came back, oh, absolutely, and thank God they did. But it was a civil war. It wasn't like we were invaded, and so it's a little bit more complicated than that. But here's my question. Does your view of this apply to all slaveholders or just Civil War figures?
It's not just Civil War figures, but Civil War Confederate heroes and leaders are not to be honored in any shape, manner, or form as a societal imperative. And the fact that we're coming to our senses with the statues and with the stars and bars, the American swastika, they all must fall. We thought we had resolved this in Charlotte a couple of years ago. It's still not resolved, and so we're moving expeditiously in every form and fashion to complete the task of eradicating these symbols of hatred and division. Now, the issue of slaveholders,
you've got to more. You've got to
say the issue of slaveholders.
Can I say one thing? Just so you know, let me just inform you one thing. And I'm not even arguing with you. I'm just saying one of the reasons this hasn't been resolved is because the public is not for doing this. Only a small minority, only about a quarter of people polled yesterday in the United States thought that these monuments should come down. Over 60% said they should remain as historical remnants of an earlier age. So, like, you need to get the public on board before you do this. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, the height of the civil rights movement, there were a lot of people who said that you need to go slow, you need to take your time, and now the people who they were saying that to are American heroes. So sometimes heroes, just like the people in the Boston Tea Party, if you had polled Boston, there would have been people who said, why are you throwing our tea in the harbor? So sometimes people...
Well, because it wasn't a democracy then. Wait, hold on. It was not a democracy. Well, hold on. No. We had... No. So you've given up on the idea of representative government, of voting for things?
No, I haven't given up on anything.
You think that...
I haven't given up on anything.
Like you have.
What I'm saying is that I understand that some people who champion social justice get it before the main society gets it. Just as some people in the Republican Party were slow to get that their president is dysfunctional.
Okay. Yeah. Let's get back to the question of slaveholders, though, because I think this is a meaningful one. I think you make a more defensible point on the Civil War question, but what bothers me about the idea that all slaveholders need to be erased from American history is
I think the issue is not being erased from history. It's being not celebrated. If you put your name on a building, you're being celebrated.
Washington. Okay. Well, the city I live in is named after the founder of the country, the first president, whose plantation, which was populated by slaves, is right down the road at Mount Vernon. So, I mean, this is not a rhetorical question. That's a real question. Should we change the name of the capital of the country? What should we do about George Washington?
George Washington is not like a Confederate general. George Washington is the founder of a country and put his life on the risk, put his life on the line in order to do so. He was a flawed human being, but he created a great thing. He was part of a great creation that's self-perpetuating and self-correcting. That's what the process is about. Yeah. And so the fact is that right now, we can get to George Washington in Washington, D.C., but right now we need to take care of these Confederate statues. And these
let me just say, I don't want to get to Washington or Washington, D.C. I want to rewrite the history of this country. I liked where you left off the first time, which is to say he redeemed himself by his good deeds, which he did. Reverend, thanks a lot for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
President Trump's once again defending comments he made about the white supremacists and neo-Nazis who gathered in Charlottesville 2 years ago to protest the removal of that statue of Robert E. Lee. The president says his original statement about very fine people on both sides was answered perfectly. Let's watch.
Oh, I've answered that question, and if you look at what I said, you will see that that question was answered perfectly. And I was talking about people that went because they felt very strongly about the monument to Robert E. Lee, a great general. Whether you like it or not, he was one of the great generals. I've spoken to many generals here, right at the White House, and many people thought of the generals. They think that he was maybe their favorite general. People were there protesting the taking down of the monument of Robert E. Lee. Everybody knows that.
Well, the people...
Leadership, one of the things that I always think is interesting and fascinating about leadership is the ability to challenge one's assumptions. And you write about Robert E. Lee, he gets his own chapter in the book, and how your assumptions, your opinion of General Lee changed over the years. Where was it before this sort of epiphany, and where is it now?
I had to write about Robert E. Lee because he had been my hero growing up. I went to Washington Lee High School, went to the same college as he, and he was an extraordinarily charismatic, effective military leader and a gentleman. If we met him here today, we'd all be impressed with him. But
maybe not us, but like...
and so he became a role model, and at West Point he was held up as a role model, and we just sort of ignored the fact that he joined the Confederacy. As I got later in life, you realize he had a moment in the spring of 1861 where after 32 years in the United States Army, making the same exact oath I had made on the plane at West Point, he made the decision to leave the United States Army, turn against his nation, try to split it in half, and he did it in defense of slavery. And if you come back to that, there's no way that I could reconcile or I could let him off the hook for that. Now, the reality is, after the war, he became a symbol for some groups that he would never have supported. And so the lost cause narrative in the South after Reconstruction actually took his memory in a direction that became white supremacy and other things.
So in your mind, his insurrection against his country, against the Union, was a lapse in leadership, but also a lapse in his morality, because he turned against his country in defense of that horrible institution, slavery.
And, you know, for the record, Robert E. Lee was more than a military tactician. You know, he was the leader of a treasonous military rebellion.
He could have chosen, and if he had gone to the other side, if he had stuck with the Union, well, it would have been great.
He was a West Point graduate.
It would have been great. He didn't.
He was a traitorous leader of a rebellion and armed.
Here's something else we can see in the meantime. A rare Civil War era photograph of slaves owned by General Robert E. Lee. Well, it's now being preserved by the National Park Service at Lee's Arlington house.
And as Mike Canine reports today, it was recently discovered thanks to the keen eye of a local volunteer.
Photographs of slaves from the Civil War era are very rare, but incredibly, a second photo of this woman, Selina Gray, was recently discovered by a National Park Service volunteer, up for auction on eBay for just $20. On the back, a handwritten inscription reads, General Lee's Slaves, Arlington, VA. Sold for $700, the photo was later donated to the Arlington House. On Saturday, it will be on public display here for the first time.
And the two children in the period stereo view are undoubtedly her children.
Selina Gray was not the typical slave. She was the trusted head housekeeper for General Robert E. Lee and his wife Mary Custis Lee, the great-granddaughter of Martha and George Washington.
Not only was this woman a slave who they allowed to get married, which was illegal at the time, they also let her get married in their home, in the parlor where they got married.
After studying the photograph, National Park Rangers believe it was taken directly behind me, next to the slave quarters on General Lee's Arlington estate. That's where Selina Gray lived with her family 150 years ago.
What I find so fascinating is how well dressed Selina and her daughters are in this photo.
During the Civil War, as the Union Army advanced, the Lee family fled, and Gray was left the keys to the property. Today, historians credit her with saving the home.
Selina was an incredibly courageous woman. She stood up to Union generals to say, save this place, save these priceless heirlooms from President George Washington that were here in the home of what was then a Confederate general.
And even though she's enslaved, she's going to stand up and is actually going to come out and want to protect those things. That's amazing.
In Arlington, Mike Canine, ABC 7 News.
I have to say this, and I'll sit down. Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They'd send some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master. Good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" He was as sick as the master. When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes. They ate the worst food. And they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh, yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes. Yeah.
60 Minutes Overtime.
This is incredible. It's huge. So that's obviously Robert E. Lee.
Right.
How hard was it just to get them here into this space without people knowing where it is?
Well, it was physical. I mean, everything was a challenge, as you know.
Some people seeing this may be upset to see Robert E. Lee in a dusty warehouse in an undisclosed location.
Anderson Cooper went down to New Orleans, spoke to the mayor about the decision to take down the statue of Robert E. Lee. You gave him the idea.
Right. We were just sitting down having a conversation in the morning, just like two kind of middle-aged friends knew each other.
He goes, I want you to take the Robert E. Lee monument down. And that's the first time I actually...
So it was Wynton Marsalis who said to you,
it was absolutely Wynton who said to me, I really want you to think about taking that thing down. And I said, well, why would I do that? And he said, well, have you ever thought about what that statue is? And I said, no. And he said, I'm paraphrasing, something to the effect of, well, if you saw it from my perspective, you would understand how demeaning it is.
From a symbolic standpoint, Robert E. Lee's statue sits over our city. It's like a curse over our city. What direction do you want our city to go in for its 300th anniversary? He's like, yeah. He wasn't arguing with it. He was like, I didn't think about that. Let me think about it.
Most statues of historical figures sort of recede into the background. You barely notice them.
Some people don't notice it, but it's in the center of the city. It's called Lee Circle. So it's a definitive marker in the city. The only reason I noticed the statue was my great uncle, who was born in 1883, always talked about that statue.
What did he say?
What you think he said? He pointed out I was 5, 6. I lived with him for a year when I was 6. He pointed out every time. He hated that statue.
Every time you walk by?
He hated the statue. He grew up on a plantation. He was kind of rough. He wasn't like a people today. Like, he was a stonecutter for the cemetery. He believed in America, though. And he knew all the injustice. He wasn't like one of these closed eyes, kind of wave a flag and smile and just be, I'm just happy to be here, boss. He wasn't like that at all. But he loved the proposition of the country. He was denied the vote for many years. He went through stuff. I mean, it made my great uncle feel bad. So because it made him feel bad, I was aware of it.
Some of the historians were arguing that statues like this one should stay there.
Why? Why should they stay there?
The argument that they make is that it's a slippery slope. You start taking statues down, where do you stop?
Okay, that same argument could be made about integration. It could be made about women's rights. It's a slippery slope. Once you start paying them the same amount of money, where do you stop? That's always the argument that's made. And the whole thing about it's our history, everything is our history. Them putting it up as our history, us taking it down is our history. That is our history.
That's part of history, too.
Everything we do is a part of our history.
Right.
There are things you did that you will not do again. You can't eradicate it from your life, but you damn sure don't have to celebrate it. And what he did was not worthy of celebration in the city of New Orleans.
Robert E. Lee.
The person who led the Confederate forces against the armies of the United States of America, and they lost.
They lost.
Where in the world are you going to find a losing general with a statue in a major city of the country that won? Oh, go look around. You tell me, when you find that statue, take a picture of it and show me.
I was here last night, but I never found that.
When it came down, did you think of your uncle?
Yeah. when the decision for it to come down, I thought of him. Yeah, definitely. I had to do that. You know, I loved him.
This would have meant something to him.
It would have meant a lot to him, because he had a lot of pride.
Did Mayor Landrieu call you when the decision came through?
He called me, yeah.
What was that conversation like?
He said, yeah, man, we did it. It came down. I said, yeah, congratulations, great. You know, if you get on the ground to do 1,000 push-ups, you're not going to celebrate at 50. Like, you know, we have thousands and thousands of push-ups to do. Our lives are not going to be long enough.
My name, as some of you know, is Lee Camp. I'm named after and a descendant of General Robert E. Lee, who should probably fire his publicist. I'm not kidding, though. He's actually my great-great-great-great-great-great third cousin. Really, but he never even sends me a birthday card, all right? So he's you know what? He's dead to me. He's dead to me. Anyway, besides being named Lee, descended from Lee, growing up in Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederacy, and attending the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, last weekend I was also 10 feet from the Charlottesville terror attack as it happened. So that is who I am and where I come from and what happened this week. And I'm saying it's time to take down the statues of Robert E. Lee. I'll tell you what, we don't even have to take them down, all right? Just move them all to a big building where anyone who wants to go see them can. It'll be called the Museum of Values Most of Us Have Evolved Beyond. It'll have Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson and J. Edgar Hoover and that Joe Paterno statue they took down at Penn State after it came out he was defending a pedophile, you know? And it'll have Bill O'Reilly. Not a statue, just Bill O'Reilly. He'd just be greeting people and grabbing asses or whatever, you know, whatever he does. It'll be kind of like the Creationist Museum in Kentucky, you know, that has a display of Jesus standing next to a dinosaur with a saddle on its back. I mean, that museum stays in business purely because millennials show up to post Instagrams with the caption, "Remember when humans believed this shit?" They're like, we kind of find this annoying, but it's paying the bills, so. Some people support the Confederate statues and flags for openly racist reasons. That is clear. You could spot them by the pronounced brow, the tiki torch, and just a little drool trickling down their chin. But for many others, it's much more complicated than that. My parents, who are enlightened, wonderful people, hi, Mom! Love the name. Love the name. They named me Lee for the same reason a lot of people semi-ambivalently support the statues. Because they want to recognize our history, our ancestors, outside of the racial implications. But the problem is, these things can't be taken out of their time and place. And you don't have to be overtly racist to unknowingly take part in and bolster a racist system. Removing the racism from Confederate monuments is impossible. It's like trying to remove the flour from a loaf of bread, or the corporate money from Congress, or the war profiteer's sack of shit from Bill Kristol. It's baked in there, baked in there. Statues are not just meant to honor our history. They're also meant to symbolize our values, to remind our society how a great person behaves. And judging by the statues, apparently there were 99% more great men than great women, and about 99% more great white men than great black men, and essentially 0 great Hispanic people, and maybe 1 great Native American. I mean, if you really look at the numbers, there were apparently far more great horses than great women. And I'd like to say, I disagree. I disagree. Plant my flag in that one. Yeah, it's real tough to get applause in this room right there. But beyond just that, Confederate statues are worse than most. They represent a pride in fighting for the right to own other human beings. That's what it was. I didn't understand that when I was little, of course. In fact, here I am, sitting on the Robert E. Lee Monument in Richmond. That's a real photo. Excuse the socks. I may look happy in that, but actually I'd been stuck up there for weeks, so it wasn't that good. But I honestly didn't know the true history because we were taught a whitewashed version in school, even to the point that my high school mascot was the Confederate rebels. That's the real dude with that ridiculous rebel soldier. Because nothing says winners like a 98-year-old racist who was on the losing side of a war. I think I was 10 before I even realized the South had lost the war. When I heard that, I was like, what the f*** are you talking about, lost? If we lost, then why do you see all this Confederate shit around town? Isn't that like wearing a t-shirt that says, President Dukakis? I was a big Dukakis fan when I was about 10. But here's the most important part, all right? To this day, I don't think I can fully understand what it must feel like to be a black person in our society and pass by glorified monuments to people who fought to continue owning your ancestors as property. It probably feels similar to seeing a grand statue to a Nazi in Germany, if there were such a thing. I realize that there are a variety of differences between the two, but the point it sends is the same. The monument says, these men who viewed your kind as second-class citizens or property or mongrels to be exterminated, they were our heroes, and we're proud of them. Okay, maybe not all statues represent those thoughts. For example, the world's largest ball of twine in Kansas, or fountain in Chicago. That's a real thing that was apparently erected by a man trying to remind dog owners to pick up their shit. But I think it probably had the reverse effect because people were like, oh, this is where you leave the shit. This is fountain. And good thing we have the mainstream media to muddy this debate and create a boiling stew of spectacular idiocy.
You know what's really interesting and a really incredible irony here is the same people that are demanding that the Confederate flag comes down are the same people that are insisting that the rainbow flag goes up. These two flags represent the exact same thing, that certain people groups are not welcome here.
No. All are welcome here. The two flags are polar opposites. That's like saying, well, having separate water fountains for whites and blacks is exactly the same as having just a water fountain. Both types represent that certain people are not allowed to drink the water. No, that's literally the opposite of what a water fountain is. Well, I guess at least she's admitting that the Confederate flag means that some people are not welcome here. That's rarely admitted by the right wing. In fact, many people don't know that the Confederate flag was hardly seen from the end of the Civil War until the 1950s. As historian David Goldfield notes, you started seeing it again associated with defiance of the federal government and opposition to the civil rights and racial equality of the African American population in the South. People only started waving that thing again when they wanted others to know they were against racial equality. That would explain why Confederate flags are so often seen in the vicinity of truck nuts. They come in pairs, they do. These Civil War icons are meant to show that our society values white men who were willing to die to keep slavery as an institution. I only recall one black monument when I was growing up in Richmond, Virginia, the Arthur Ashe Monument. Arthur Ashe was a hero of mine because I was in Richmond and I played tennis just like he did. But I now realize it speaks volumes that the black hero in our city is willing to celebrate, that our city is willing to celebrate, is one who excelled at sport and did not really threaten white folks at all. This doesn't mean Arthur Ashe wasn't great, But it sends a message. If our white monuments imply excellence is fighting a war to keep black people as property, and our black monuments imply excellence is politely winning tennis matches. Furthermore, it's a little weird that the Ashe monument makes it look like Arthur Ashe was taking books away from children and then swatting them with a tennis racket. It's like, stop it! Stop it! Get off of me, you street urchins! This tracksuit is worth more than your life! But this past weekend, I honestly witnessed a horrific event in Charlottesville. Yet I'm still hopeful. The anger and hatred and even murder we've seen from racists and white supremacists is the last gasp of a dying worldview. Trump is an overt, in-your-face symbol of a backwards, unevolved, ignorant set of beliefs. But those beliefs have quietly and secretly been the bedrock of our society for a long time. And now I have hope they're being pulled up and discarded. These aren't easy or comfortable times, but no change ever comes from comfort. And in this cultural battle, the good guys are winning. Coming to you from Washington, D.C., the Belly of the Beast is Redacted tonight.
To keep fighting, doctors recommend a daily dose of Redacted Tonight. Side effects may include side-splitting, knee slapping, and spitting up drinks. Click subscribe for updates on new videos.
What is the criteria by which we remove statues? I mean, you mentioned one criteria, which is it is offending to someone. And as an example, you mentioned the statues by the Nazi regime in Germany, which of course are offending to Jews. Now, I am from Germany, and I can tell you, we are not removing these statues because they would be offensive to Israel or to the Jews. We are removing them because we are afraid of ourselves. We remove them because we are afraid that they become an assembly point for Nazis and that the atrocities that we lived in our country are reoccurring. We are still scared of that 70 years after the Second World War. That's why we removed them, not because they're offending. there are offending statues all over the world. So the question is, you know, are you scared that slavery is coming back, or why do you want them to be removed?
Fascinating, thank you. And your question goes to this point about how powerful these things can be. And there's a very last one, I think, over here. This will be the last one.
So following on quite nicely from that, I would ask that when we talk about removing statues, it seems that people are really afraid of history being erased. Histories, in the first place, aren't being taught in schools in anywhere near an adequate level to deal with empire and the violence and pain of that. So in Australia at the moment, there's been a call after the Statement from the Heart last year for a process of truth-telling about our history. And the word used means reconciliation after a struggle. But people have been really afraid because that requires a recognition of the pain and the harm and that ongoing violence. So what are you so afraid of if you don't want to take a statue down?
Great, thank you. Thanks for all of those. Sorry for people we couldn't get in. David, a quick one for you. You said at the beginning that if people are, you know, unambiguously bad, in a way there's not two sides of the ledger, and you cited Colston as an example, then you said there's not really a case for keeping the statue up. Put the other way, the questioner says, you know, unless they're Florence Nightingale, does that mean they can't be remembered and we're only going to end up with these very vanilla, was your word about Millicent Fawcett statues? Is that the risk?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I have a huge problem with both Mother Teresa and Florence Nightingale. So let's not go there.
And in a way, there is no vanilla figure, actually, in a way.
There isn't. I think this is why I think the debate's not about statues. You know, I've got no problem with there being a statue to Churchill, but I do have a problem with the fact that we need to tell a more. He's a much more complicated figure. He's a much more interesting figure than the Darkest Hour figure. I just want us to be honest about our history. I don't really care about the statues that much. What I care about is us being honest about our history. One of the myths about people who debate these is that this is some form of, that it's all about offense. I've never mentioned offense. I don't feel offense at any statue. And it's not about a sense of victimhood. I really don't feel, and I presume you don't feel I carry myself like a victim. It's to do with, I think we can become a better country. I think we're a good enough, strong enough, honest enough country to confront our history, the good and the bad. I think we're up for it. I think we can do it. I just would be happier to live in a country that wasn't in denial about parts of its past.
Great. Because time is so short, I'd like the three of you to take on those last two questions, both of which had fear in them. The German example and then the examples from Australia, but both were saying, what are you afraid of about either keeping these statues or removing them? Why don't we start with you, Tiffany?
It's a really good point about Germany, but you see, I think that there is a huge distrust of the public, and I think there is here too, and that makes me feel very uncomfortable. It's not that I think the public are this wonderful, smart group of people, but I think we have to treat them with a little bit of respect and not like they're Pavlovian dogs who can't see a statue and not turn into some sort of Nazi or...
But a woman was killed last year at the base of a statue to General Lee. The far right, the Nazi, the KKK are rallying around these statues and people have died.
What did Steve Bannon say?
Something that would elicit
Hang on,
and what did Steve Bannon say? He said, as long as they're talking about statues, we've got them. I think there's a kind of circle where the alt-right and the whatever you might want to call it are kind of reinforcing a battle over statues.
I think we need to. I wrote exactly that.
Yeah, and I just think we just need to depoliticize it entirely.
But they are dangerous because they are.
I don't think they're dangerous.
You don't think statues are dangerous?
I do not think they are dangerous.
I mean, in the case of what happened in Charlottesville, it was the removal that triggered the
It wasn't the
episode, wasn't it?
No, it was a demonstration about the statue.
In Charlottesville?
It was, yeah, it was a lightning rod. People are using, and they always have used these statues to rally around.
Let me just, because we're only we're already over time. Sorry, I'm talking over you, but I just want to make sure we wrap it up. So, Afu, the question there was, you know, in Germany they felt a very good reason not to put these up because they were worried about them being rallying points. Here, in a way, what is I'm just channeling what the questioner said, what are you afraid of that might happen if these statues, these revering objects remain in place? And he put it sort of rhetorically, are you afraid slavery will come back if you keep Nelson up there on a plinth, on a pedestal?
So slavery was the manifestation of an ideology of white supremacy which has not gone away, and it bears itself out in so many parts of contemporary life in the UK. Black Afro-Caribbean schoolboys are 168 times more likely to be excluded than white kids. Youth unemployment for young black men is double what it is for young white people. 50% of people of black African heritage live in poverty, which is more than 2 times the rate for other people who live in poverty. The reality is that we have not recovered from these traumatic histories. They are part of our everyday life. And we constantly live in a state of amnesia where we call this the ancient history, that people who raise it are told that they're victims, instead of the fact that we are simply introducing facts into the debate. What the lady from Australia, made such and Australia's going through a very interesting conversation right now. I know exactly what we are afraid of. Britishness is a fragile identity right now. We cannot withstand questioning, interrogating, and talking honestly about our historical record. That is the real problem here, and I agree with David that statues are a symptom and not a cause. The real issue is our fragility, our insecurity, our hostility in having a very honest conversation about who we are and how we got here, and that is why we need to have this debate.
Thank you. And